Hello and welcome to my channel. Yet another colored pencil portrait. This time I'm going to be drawing Richard Dean Anderson, best known for MacGyver. Again, I'm going to be using colored pencils on sandpaper. Let's get to it. The colored pencils are Faber Castell Polychromos colored pencils, probably my favorite ones. And again, I'm going to be working on 1000 grit waterproof sandpaper. It's the surface that I've been using for most of my colored pencil drawings recently. And this is yet another portrait of an actor in a series of colored pencil portraits I've been doing. And after I draw some of the darker details on my sketch, I'm going to move on with the background. Now the background here will be a little bit more challenging, or maybe a little bit more tedious than usual, because one of the disadvantages of colored pencils in general, but also on this surface as well, is that they don't blend that quickly and they don't cover large areas very quickly. Pastels and pastel pencils are obviously a lot better for that, but colored pencils are better for details and some other things. So I'm going to have to do a bit more layering and blending here. And I used a number of colors to achieve this lighter background, because normally this goes a little bit faster and it's a bit easier when the color you're trying to achieve is more similar to the background color, to the color of your sandpaper, which is in my case kind of like a slightly darker grayish color. But here I'm trying to achieve a lighter yellowish color, so I had to do a bit more layering and I had to be a little bit more patient. I mostly used an ivory colored pencil and I mixed in a couple of browns with that. I also added some smaller details on that because it's supposed to be like a wall behind him in the background. So I added some small touches of texture, like some cracks, to imitate the rough surface and rough texture of the wall. Right now I'm moving on with the portrait itself, just putting down some of the darker bits and preparing to move on with the portrait itself, because it's not that I like to procrastinate, it's I like to frame the portrait by laying down some of the darker areas and some of the darker elements or lighter elements around the outline, so that I can establish some of the basic contrasts, give myself a clearer idea about the exact shape of the main subject, and also maybe give myself some suggestions of how much value I'm going to need on my main subject's face, which colors I'm going to use, and stuff like that. So here I moved on with the details. I started drawing the eyes, mostly using a combination of this dark brown, a little bit of black, and some grayish and even ivory colors, and then a bit more brown for the eyebrows, and even a little bit of some other purplish and magenta tones here and there. But I'm mostly going to get creative with colors once I start working on the actual skin tone. Right now I'm just putting in some of the darker bits and mostly using those browns and blacks. Most people recommend against using a black colored pencil, but I actually like using it and combining it with other colored pencils. I find that it works particularly well on this sanded surface because it allows you to mix in colors or blend them more easily, because the rough surface grinds down on the lead and allows you to actually blend colored pencils, which is not something that you can do on regular paper when you're using dry media, when you're not using any solvents. And I don't like to use solvents, so sandpaper just allows me to do things that I wouldn't normally be able to do on regular paper. And another thing that sanded paper allows you to do is go from dark to light, to put down darker layers first and then work on top of that with lighter pencils and lighter colors. So for the skin tone, first I'm going to start with a little bit of ochre here, which is fairly dark, especially in combination with this darker color of my sandpaper. But as you will see, once I start layering some lighter colors on top of that, I'm going to get a lot closer to the actual skin color. A little bit more of this reddish brown, which is burnt sienna, which I used at the top to create a shadow area just at the top of the head and maybe around the temple area. And now, as you can see, I'm moving on with some lighter colors. I'm going to use a combination of light red beige and cinnamon colored pencil on top of the burnt ochre, and that I think will be close enough to the actual color of the skin that I'm trying to achieve. And for some of the highlights, some of the lightest areas, for example above the eyebrow and on the cheekbone, I may even add a few touches of an ivory colored pencil, which is the lightest colored pencil that I'm going to use for this portrait. It's almost white, but it's a little bit darker and kind of like a yellowish white color. So here, this part of the nose to the left is catching a bit of light from the light source, and it's going to be a lot lighter than the rest of the nose. I like these contrasts. When you have these strong contrasts and shadows, you should always use that opportunity to show some depth and volume in your subject, even though these things that help you create a more engaging and more three-dimensional looking character can also make the drawing process a little bit more challenging. So here I'm working a little bit more on the background, just adding some more of that ivory colored pencil and some brownish pencils and blending that with whatever I can. The thing is that colored pencils can be blended on sandpaper. It's just that too has its limitations. Obviously, these are not pastels, even though I think you'll find, if you've never worked on this surface, you'll find that in some ways colored pencils on sanded paper tend to behave a little bit more like pastel pencils than colored pencils, because you can do some things that you can't really do on regular paper, and if nothing else, the colors are just more vibrant on this surface. Here I'm working on the teeth, and this can be a little bit tricky when working in color, because on one hand I know the teeth are supposed to be lighter than the skin, at least they are of lighter color, but then again they're in the shadow which is coming from the upper lip mostly, and I can't use a white color pencil, I can't even use an ivory color pencil. So I first put down some slightly darker tones, then I used a little bit of ivory colored pencil gently on top of that, and then I modified that with some other colors like that beige and some others, just to make them a little bit darker, but at the same time make their color more consistent with the overall range of colors in this setting. Now that the background here on the left is finished, I'm adding some more texture and some more details to the background. Like I said, here standing in front of a wall here, and I'm going to try to imitate the texture and the appearance of the wall with a few cracks here and there. And another thing that's important about this background is, of course, creating a very nice clean edge between the main subject and the background, and creating that contrast between the main subject and the background. Here I'm continuing to work on the face, trying to integrate these eyebrows and these wrinkles around the eyes a little bit better into the skin tone that I achieved. and adding some touches of warmer colors here and there, because I felt that that cinnamon colored pencil, which I used as my sort of a predominant color for the skin tone, I felt that it was a little bit too cool, and I added some touches of warmer colors as well. A bit more shadow here under the chin, under his jaw, and a few more wrinkles there as well. Some more reddish tones around the lips, and maybe a few wrinkles on the forehead area and in between the eyebrows. I don't really know how old he was in this picture, but I'm assuming he wasn't that young, because his face does appear a little bit more wrinkly than in some of the other younger pictures, but I wouldn't know. I don't really know his face that well, and I didn't really watch any of those TV series. Not that I watch much on TV anyway, but this was back in the 80s, I think, when this TV series was popular. Yes, some nice, interesting highlights on the lips, and a slightly asymmetrical mouth, I think, which is kind of wider on one side when he smiles, and I wanted to capture that. If you see these elements of asymmetry, it can be interesting to try to capture them, because they also make it easier for you to capture the likeness of the character. For the hair, I mostly used walnut brown, and then combined that with some other colors. I added some sort of a yellowish brown, maybe a little bit of that raw umber, and then I used a bit of the cinnamon colored pencil on top, because I used that for the highlights on the hair, even though there's a little bit more red in there than I would like, but it was still the closest thing to what I was trying to achieve. And then on some of the lightest bits, I even used that light beige colored pencil. I'm mostly happy with the way the hair looks, and one of the things that I've learned the hard way when it comes to drawing hair on sandpaper is that it's much better to try to work from dark to light. Normally, when you work in colored pencils on regular paper, you work from light to dark, and you know that you will be limited if you try to put in lighter tones, and you have to plan them ahead. Here on sanded surfaces, you don't have to do that at all. You can just go in with the darker tones and then just pull some lighter hairs or segments of hair on top of that, just like that, just as though you were painting. So that kind of makes it a lot easier for you to create more depth in the hair, make it look more three-dimensional, and create a realistic looking texture in it, and create an illusion of volume and things like that. I'm continuing to shade the rest of the face using the burnt ochre, and going around some of the wrinkles which I've already laid down. I don't want to spoil some of the darker elements of my sketch. I want to keep them in place so that I can navigate more easily when I'm doing this portrait. But as you can see, I'm making very good progress with the shading, and kind of moving on slowly onto the right side of the face, and just refining the appearance of the left side of the face at the same time. It's always important to have a nice range of value when you're drawing a nose, The tip is usually going to have some highlights because the tip itself is round, so you have to shade it as though it were a sphere. And of course around the mouth I have to make sure that the mouth is neither too wide nor too narrow. I have to do a little bit of shading around it, because the shading around the mouth is just as important as the sketch or the outline, because if you fail at the shading, you will fail to capture the exact shape of the mouth or the expression of the person. So there are a lot of challenges there, especially with colored pencil, because this is kind of a relatively new medium for me. I've done a lot of colored pencil drawings in the past, and I don't think I was ever that good with colored pencil, but sandpaper really opened up some new opportunities for me, and it's been fun. It's been fun experimenting with this combination of materials. Just working on the other eye and the other eyebrow, and putting down some finishing touches in that area, mostly using some lighter colored pencils. And then going back in with a dark brown colored pencil and trying to define some of these larger wrinkles on the face. And also because I felt that the face was a little bit too dark overall, I just kept shading and layering with some lighter colors until I was happy with the skin tone I was achieving. I also kept adding a bit more of those slightly warmer colors, especially in the shadow areas. I added a bit of that sanguine colored pencil, which has a little bit of an orangey tone in it. And I just kept refining some of the lighter areas by gradually making them lighter and lighter using the light red beige colored pencil. And then I sort of double checked the overall shape of his hair and his face, and then I went back in and did a bit of refining on those things as well. The whole drawing process, if you want to know, was around 3 hours, maybe 3.5 hours. And I don't know if I'm going to make a full-length video out of this one, but normally if you want to see real-time footage and full-length videos, you should check out my Patreon, because that's where I post that sort of stuff. Here on YouTube I normally do time lapses. Sometimes those time lapses are narrated, sometimes they're a little bit shorter. So if you want more content, then maybe you should go to my Patreon. For the shirt, I actually picked this, juniper green for my base color, and then I started working with some bluish tones and even black on top of that, because it's a shirt that has multiple colors, and I think it has a kind of a checkered pattern of some sort. So I'm going to have to establish those contrasts as well. And of course make some indications of folds in the shirt, especially between the torso and the shoulder and arm area. Where the arms are bending, you would expect a little bit more wrinkles and folds in the clothes there. And just adding a few buttons here and there. I always find this final part where I have to work on the clothes a lot easier than the face itself, because when you're drawing faces you have to worry about likeness, and there is a bit more tension because you need to be more careful and more precise. When I move on to the clothes, I usually don't worry too much, because I know I can improvise and simplify things. Now, one of the things that I didn't do with any of these colored pencil portraits that I've been doing recently is I haven't turned any of them into vignettes. So I'm going to stick to that now that I've started it this way, even though normally when I draw portraits I tend to prefer vignettes, and they tend to work better. But here, because this is not a vignette, it gets even more complicated to plan out the composition and the background and things like that. So this is probably the best reference I could find, or at least it was to my liking. I liked it best. I even added a bit of shadow here to the right of his head. I made that part of the background a little bit darker. And a few more cracks and dents in the wall. Now, even though I generally find this part of the drawing to be a bit easier when I finally get down to drawing clothes, I'd also like to simplify it and sometimes even oversimplify it, because honestly I can't really be bothered with drawing clothes. I don't find it particularly motivating, and I don't really like to use too much energy on that. So I like to define these darker bits, these darker folds in the clothes, especially around the shoulder area, and then I like to add some patterns or some colors on top of that. So here I did a little bit more work with a brush, and then a bit more work on the edges. And now I'm going to continue to refine the appearance of the shirt, adding some more of these details, using first a little bit of black and then using some other colors, because it's a multicolored shirt. But I think my choice of a dull green for the base color was the right one, because it looks close enough to the original. The reference is going to be in the description if you want to check that out. For the lighter bits of the shirt, I even used a bit of that light warm grey and some other colors. And I also used a touch of Caput Mortem and some other browns, and even this black colored pencil. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention that in addition to the Faber Castell black colored pencil, I also like to use the Kohinoor black colored pencils. They're a little bit darker, I feel, and a little bit easier to put on top of some of the lighter pencils. Here I'm just going to put down some finishing marks on Richard's face, trying to refine the appearance of the lips, maybe fix the shape of the teeth and the mouth, and just put down a few finishing touches here and there. After that, just a few more edges need to be cleaned up a little bit, so that I can have a nice strong contrast between his shoulder area and the background. And that, I think, is it. Don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget to give me a like and comment. I'm going to put my signature here above the shoulder on the right. Once again, don't forget to check out my other videos. If you want to see longer videos, you should check out my Patreon. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.